actually break into a cell phone store in the hope that they were going to be able to get walkie-talkies because they needed the communication equipment so badly. But at this hour, as you point out, a massive search and rescue effort is underway. Authorities are searching now, hoping to find the bodies of survivors and as well as those who did not survive this horrific attack. Mayor Giuliani mentioned a short time ago that there have been, as you mentioned, a number of miraculous stories, and they are holding out hope that there will be survivors. But the rescue efforts have been hampered by a couple of reasons. Number one, there was serious fire problems throughout the day here, and secondly, an adjacent building, World Trade Building number 7, was on fire and was feared that it would collapse throughout most of the day, and that's exactly what happened. At about 5:40 this afternoon, that building gave way, collapsing, falling to the south in the other direction compared to the World Trade Towers, which fell in the northerly direction. That building now resting on its side. And it's interesting to note that that building, number 7, is the same building where the city of New York has its emergency operations bunker. And that's where the authorities go whenever they have some type of an emergency, such as this one, to coordinate the activities of the police and the fire department. In this case, however, they have obviously had to make do elsewhere. Now, at this hour, as you can see over my shoulder, there is a great deal of emergency equipment down the street here. For the last few hours, we have seen a steady stream of heavy equipment. We've seen cranes, we've seen tractors, we've seen generators, portable lights, all types of equipment getting in place so that they can conduct this massive search. As the mayor said, they have feared the loss now of some 300 firemen, including some of the top brass, as you put it, of the fire department, including the chaplain for the fire department and the fire department chief. Between 30 and 40 policemen are thought to be missing. Now, that is a reduction in the number that we had earlier, which was as high as 78, and we understand that at least a few officers have been located, so that in and of itself is good news. As for the rest of Manhattan, you can leave the island of Manhattan, but don't try coming in right now. The bridges, the tunnels are still closed off, and lower Manhattan is going to be completely sealed off tomorrow. The authorities say that anyone down here other than the authorities working on the search and rescue mission will be charged with a Class B misdemeanor. Back to you.
All right, we're back in Los Angeles now. John Beard along with Christine Devine here in the Fox 11 newsroom. All day long, we've been going back and forth to LAX, and in the last couple of hours, we started getting some tentative efforts to get airline flight schedules back on track. Let's go back out to Linda Joyce and see what progress has been made. Linda.
John and Christine, I can tell you that they are working round the clock. In fact, tonight, LAX officials are trying to figure out how to put 178 airplanes back in the air. They, along with airport officials from every airport across the country, is in constant contact with the FAA. They are trying to figure out this plan to get the nation flying again. Also, I want to take a look right now with our mass cam to show you what this airport actually looks like, because this is a site you will never, or I shouldn't say never, but you may have never seen before. Many of us have never seen this. There are no airplanes stacking up, and that is such an unusual sight, as anyone who's ever looked at the sky above LAX and knows. Another thing that you can prepare for when this airport does reopen is increased security measures, and that will happen soon.
If you've ever been at any of the hub airports when they've had major weather disruptions in Chicago or Dallas or St. Louis, it takes 2 or 3 days to get those airports back into full operation. We expect that's what's going to happen nationwide.
There's going to be some new things here. There's going to be a lot of getting used to things and getting things wound up, recovering from being closed. The other thing is, I think there'd be a strong indication that, at least in the very beginning, we would probably restrict the passengers only to go through the screening stations. And I think that just allow a lot of time for that.
And we understand that it is possible, if the call comes from FAA, that this airport will open tomorrow at 9. Reporting live from LAX, I'm Linda Joyce. Back to you in the studio.
Linda, thank you. We want to show a graphic right now with some numbers for relatives of people who were on board those 4 planes that crashed today to call. There were 2 American Airlines planes. Their number is 1-800-245-0999. American Airlines did fly on a plane today of personnel this evening to LAX to help deal with the relatives. 2 planes from United also went down. Their phone number is 1-800-932-8555. They are coordinating assistance with relatives, so please call those numbers if you need some help. Also around town, there have been a number of churches gathering in prayer throughout today, throughout the city. different face, people gathering together to pray for the relatives, the victims, those that are still trapped in the different places, New York, Washington. We go now to Jane Yamamoto, who is at one of the churches holding a prayer service in Northridge. Jane?
Well, we're at the Congregational Church of Northridge, and this is where they held a prayer vigil earlier tonight. A lot of people from the community, they came out here supporting each other. There were hymns that they sung, as well as prayer. Just reflecting on the day's events, it has been a very difficult time, especially for one Southland company. The man you see there, 41-year-old Edmund Glazier, he was the chief financial officer for a Chatsworth-based telecommunications company. He was on American Airlines Flight 11. It was going from Boston headed to Los Angeles. He was killed in that crash, and his good friend, who is also the CEO of the company you see right there, well, he was telling us that Edmund was quite the family man. He had a wife and a 4-year-old son, and to him, family came first, and for that company, they're just having a very difficult time today. And that's the latest. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Jane, thank you. Joining us now is Dr. Salih Amina Muhammad, who is an ambassador of goodwill for the Islamic culture. Dr. Muhammad, now they clearly are Muslim victims, not just physical victims who were killed in the explosions today, but who will be victimized in another way by the publicity from all of this.
Yes, certainly. That's actually the greatest fear of the Muslim community. Right before coming on tonight, I spoke with a very close friend of mine, Sheikh Shuaib, who's Imam of the King Fahd Mosque. And that's probably a very high-profile mosque because of the name King Fahd on it, King of Saudi Arabia. And he said the greatest concern of the Muslim community, not only calls I've been getting, but calls he's been getting and the consulates and embassies have been getting, is about retaliation.
Well, now, many people, or at least some of our viewers, may not know that Christianity, Islam, Judaism are really very closely related. As a matter of fact, they're interconnected in many ways. Extraordinarily
so. So much so that we call Judaism and Christianity our sister religions, and that in fact all of the Jewish prophets and Jesus are Muslims, because the word Muslim simply means a believer. And we believe that Islam was, although it had no title, was a religion that's always existed throughout from the beginning of time, and that Prophet Abraham was the father of the Muslim religion. And of course, at that point, it was called Judaism. And when Jesus came, he perfected some aspects of where people had gone astray from their true religion of Judaism, and he was a good practicing Jew. And we respect all of their prophets, and which we consider our prophets too, and very much Jesus.
There have been calls tonight for compassion for people of all races all over, so we're going to continue to advocate that tonight, and thank you for being with us at this point in time. New information coming in right now, U.S. officials confirming that American intelligence agencies saying they had no inkling that the terror attacks were about to take place. Spies and government officials saying they did not detect any hint of plans for the devastation, the attacks that we witnessed today.
We're going to leave you with some phone numbers here. These are important numbers in a number of areas. Of course, if you think you may have had, and we pointed out all day long, 3 of the 4 aircraft that were hijacked and crashed today were heading for the west, all for the West Coast, 3 of the 4 for Los Angeles. Here is information, the number to call for information on the victims aboard those 4 aircraft. It's 1-800-331-0075.
This here is a number if you have any tips on terrorist activity. It's an FBI number, 866-483-5137. They also have a website, www.ifccfbi.gov.
Also, we want to let you know that the airlines, that is United Airlines, American Airlines, are working with the families and have been all day. We've had their numbers up. If you have to contact the airline, if you think you may know someone who is on one of those airline flights today. The airlines, of course, have also provided, in addition to the Salvation Army, grief counselors out at LAX and in a couple of locations near the airport for families and friends of the victims of these flights to help them get through the immediate and most traumatic period.
To tell you a little bit more about what's going on here in the Southland, we have a list of closures for tomorrow, closures for throughout the week. We know that federal courthouses in Los Angeles County area are closed for tomorrow. We can tell you LA schools are up and running tomorrow. Metrolink is running. Theme parks are back in operation tomorrow. Disneyland's open tomorrow. The fair is open. Here are events that have been canceled, though, or postponed, we should say. Tonight's Latin Grammys, Sunday's Primetime Emmys, tonight's Madonna concert. Check for more information regarding concerts later this week. Black Crowes concert canceled tonight, and all Major League Baseball across the country.
And Major League Sports, that is football, baseball, that's on a day-to-day basis. There are two arguments. One, that they need to be canceled out of respect. One, that we need to get back and give people something else to do and get back to normal as soon as possible. Now back to the network coverage.
Terrible, terrible day in New York and Washington and out in Pennsylvania, where one plane crashed. Two directed into the World Trade Center towers in New York, and one into the Pentagon. People aboard, a couple hundred people aboard, killed. No one knows how many people on the ground at the Pentagon and in New York were killed, but we're hearing some startling stories now of people on board the flights calling their relatives from their cell phones and reporting what was going on. A woman in San Francisco reported that her son called from the United flight that crashed in Pennsylvania. He said, "We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb." Once again, we're trying to follow every development in this. The United States now threatening anybody who had a hand in this and anybody who would have harbored them. That would include the Taliban government of Afghanistan if they had anything to do with harboring Osama bin Laden, who, if he had anything to do with this terrible attack. Linda.
Some 15 hours after the first attack on the World Trade Center, there are reports now that there are some people alive in the basement of the World Trade Center. Apparently, according to the mayor of New York City, at least 2 people have cell phones. They've called their relatives, apparently their relatives in Seattle, to let them know they're alive. Also to let them know that there are others in that basement trapped along with them. The mayor says that there is a rescue effort that is underway. He also said it's been underway for some time. They're still trying to reach those people. One of the difficult things here is fortifying what is left of the World Trade Center so that they can get to those people who are still in that basement, hoping that they do have some air pockets that they can use for oxygen. We have this producers tell us once again who we have to join us. Colonel Hunt with us, who is going to help us with a little bit more information. Colonel, are you there?
Hi. Yeah, how you doing?
Hi. Tell us exactly what you know.
What I'm getting is there's some interest. There has been some rocket attacks in Afghanistan reported. Everyone, we're denying it. That's of some interest. I don't think we get enough information to say we're targeting Afghanistan.
Colonel, I think well, the White House, actually the Pentagon has come out pretty quickly saying that they have nothing to do with it. What people may not be aware of is that there is a terrible civil war going on in that country.
Yeah, right.
There were explosions even yesterday that were utterly unrelated, and so at this point it's being assumed that those explosions have something to do with the Civil War and not any sort of United States response.
I guess, Mike, from what I know is that maybe of some interest, I've actually run about 9 hijacking training exercises at about 9, 10 major airports over the last 15 years, and I've actually did one in Boston. And it's already been noted more than once here that the GAO reported and the FAA has reported, and it's unfortunate, tragic, devastating that it's going to take these numbers of deaths that'll finally come out to possibly get us excited about doing the right stuff at our airports. Once we figure out who did this, everyone seems to want to pick on bin Laden. I think it's an easy target. I'm not so sure yet that it is. We still got to answer the question of who's supporting these people. I don't think it's enough to take out an organization. You have to do the country and the people. There's no question Saudi Arabia's involved. Clearly Afghanistan's involved. But we've got state-sponsored terrorism. This was such a well-planned deal. I would find it difficult to believe that this was done by just a terrorist organization. This takes inside information. This takes a lot of planning and pinpoint execution.
Colonel David Hunt, let me ask you, if it is state-sponsored terrorism, I mean, not even sponsored, state-involved or state-countenanced or state-aware terrorism, what you heard the president saying tonight, that we would make no distinction between those who carried out these deeds and those who harbored them, does that mean we rain bombs down on some countries?
Look, I have heard, you know, take anything in the recent 20 years, from the tragedy in Beirut with the Marines and Army guys who were killed, to the most recent tragedies with the coal, in Saudi Arabia with Tobol Towers. We've heard our leadership, public officials, make those same comments. My problem, John, is we've got nothing happening. I mean, the most recent time I was on with you, we had the Chinese take some of our guys for a few days, and now we're paying the Chinese some money for
well, right, but you would admit, even in this discussion, that there is a hugely quantitative difference between the couple hundred, 200-300 Marines killed in Beirut, the few hundred killed at the Khobar Towers, the 168 killed at Oklahoma City, and what is likely to be 10 to 20,000 dead at the World Trade Center. Is that what it is? Just numbers?
John,
if you get into the thousands, we go to war?
I guess my point, Augusta, is have we had enough? I mean, are we mad enough now to do what we need to do and unleash the dogs of war? Yeah, the tragedy is that, I mean, one person gets killed overseas, 20 get killed overseas, it's over there. And it had to come to this level of devastation.
All right.
Although, yet, I'm not convinced, as we're speaking now, what we're really willing to do.
All right, let me put it there. Let me make it practical for a moment.
Sure.
You have run these hijacking exercises. Yep. We now have reports from numerous cell calls made to relatives aboard these planes as they were going in, that the hijackers had taken over the planes with knives. Not with guns, not with bombs, with knives. Maybe plastic knives, maybe knives that couldn't be detected in the middle of the day. Something as simple as a knife. Get up, stab the stewardess, take over the cabin, cut the throat of the pilot, fly the plane into the tower.
Yep.
Why don't we have armed sky marshals on our planes?
Oh, you're right. You can remember when we had them.
I do remember when we had them.
I remember.
I don't know why they went away.
One, it made everyone nervous. 2, we lost the money. 3, it got...
Wait a minute, you mean the airlines lost 3 seats of revenue?
No. It cost... The Sky Marshal program was actually people that were hired as U.S. Marshals. They were... Some of them were... When they first did it, they were active duty Special Forces guys. The program ran out of money. Nothing happened. We've got people with active guns on the plane. It made a lot of people nervous. You're absolutely right. If in fact the reports are that at least one of these planes was taken over with knives, clearly Sky Marshals would have been great to have.
I mean, that would at least assure you that even if somebody got on board with a gun, that there was a fairly even match. I mean, you know, passengers, you're right, get nervous about it. A gunfight on board a plane at 33,000 feet is an inherently dangerous situation. But it might be a better result than what we saw today.
I think you're absolutely right. That's certainly one airplane. I find it difficult to believe, though, that the other all these 3 planes, there weren't some weapons involved. But the terrible fact is that our airports are civs. It costs billions of dollars to secure them. All of the facilities, the fencing around all these airports, with the exercise we've done more than one in which we just throw the weapon over the fence and go get it. We get into a mechanic's outfit, put a fake badge over, and walk any place in the airport you want to. Here's the problem with this, John. I think we have to look out. We got to take care of business on who did this. One of my concerns is that we're going to start losing a lot more civil liberties than we really need to think about. I don't mind us being inconvenienced. I think we need to be more inconvenienced, like the El Al and like the Rome Airport is. But I think we ought to be real careful about putting the 82nd Airborne Division on the streets of New York City.
Colonel Hunt?
Yes, ma'am.
If you would, I'm sorry to interrupt, if you would just stay with us for a moment. We need to bring in another voice here. Congressman Chris Cox of California joining us with more information on what members of Congress are being told this hour, particularly with regard to the investigation and what we're learning, who may be responsible for these 4 plane attacks. Congressman, what do you know?
Well, this evening, I and the congressional leadership and other members of the House and the Senate were briefed by the Attorney General by the director of the FBI, by the Deputy National Security Advisor. It was a classified briefing, and so of course I can't share with you the details of what was discussed, but as the President explained to the country this evening, we are focused on two main objectives. Number one is hunting down, tracking down the source of this terrorism and eradicating it. And second, putting the country back on its feet and getting back to work.
Congressman, let me ask you some pointed questions. Our chief political correspondent, Carl Cameron, has been talking with congressional staffers who have high-level security clearance. I'm assuming you've been told the same thing, that there are Osama bin Laden sympathizers in Broward County, Florida, and Daytona Beach, Florida, one of whom was listed on the manifest, the passenger list, of one of these 4 hijacked flights. I'm sure you were being told the same thing, were you not?
Well, what I can't tell you, of course, is precisely what was discussed in a classified briefing. What I can tell you is what you might surmise on your own, and that is that going through these manifests, identifying the pilots and so on who were on board these aircraft is one of the very elementary first steps that law enforcement is going to be taking in these cases.
All right. Now, let me also ask you about this report. Orrin Hatch, ranking Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee, said earlier this evening that U.S. intelligence has intercepted communications between certain bin Laden backers, acknowledging that certain targets had been hit. What were you told?
In this briefing, of course, I'm not at liberty to describe to you what I was told. During the day today, I heard reports from public sources that these intercepts had been made. I should tell you that I started out the day with the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon. At the very moment that these attacks occurred on the World Trade Center, I was with Don Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz in the Secretary's private dining room. Ironically, we were discussing the new threats that are emerging that America is facing, and the Secretary had said literally moments before the Pentagon itself was hit that there will be another event. And he said it twice for emphasis, there will be another event, not because he'd been tipped off, but because he was so certain that terrorists are aiming now at America, at our heartland.
I know. I realize that if I keep asking you more pointed questions, you're still not going to tell me what was said during that briefing. But earlier today, I spoke to the Foreign Minister of Israel, asked him pointedly, with all of their extensive intelligence network, did they have any clue, any specific indication that this attack was coming? Israel said no. Is that what you have also gotten from the United States government? Our
government, as has been said in many public fora during the day today, did not have advance warning of this attack. It was indeed a horrible surprise attack and one of the most egregious acts of mass murder imaginable.
What is it for the rest of the night for you and other leaders of Congress? Are you hunkered down in a certain place? Do you continue to hold meetings throughout the night? Are you going to bed down for the night and begin things anew tomorrow morning? What's the plan?
Well, as you know, I'm a member of the elected leadership of Congress, and our small group of elected leaders in the House and the Senate has decided very recently, and we are going to continue to talk and plan tomorrow, that we will be in session tomorrow, that Congress will go to work. It will not be exactly business as usual because we will take up a resolution dealing with this subject. It's probably very likely that early on in what remains of the week, we will also take up a supplemental appropriations bill to give our government agencies dealing with this problem the tools that they need.
Now, you realize that some mere statement about just condemning this act is probably going to be insufficient for an awful lot of Americans who are outraged tonight, who are terrified tonight.
There is no question that a piece of paper, condemnation, public opprobrium, UN resolutions, or even cruise missiles directed at militarily related targets, the usual sort of response, is wholly inadequate here. But what has happened today has transformed not only America, but I think the free world. And I think what we have seen now is that there is an annealing. We are now united in our resolve, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, Americans and our allies, in going after this menace, which is a threat to civilization. Civilization has a right to protect itself. These people, whether it is Osama bin Laden or some other horrible person uniquely as evil as is he, we are going to eradicate these people from the face of the earth.
Do you think that the intelligence community let all of us Americans down today?
That's the wrong way to direct all of the emotion and energy and, if I may say, enthusiasm for going after this problem. Rather than direct it inward and point fingers, we've got to direct it outward at the problem. And I think properly channeled, all of these energies will be put to good use. We have, in America and in the free world, many more resources than do the terrorist networks that we are facing. What they're doing is leveraging rather meager resources into terror, really making a 250 million people feel as if they are threatened, when in fact they are not. The free world can and must go on, and if we decide to do so in ways that we have not up until now, we can and we will win.
Congressman Chris Cox, before I let you go very quickly, when is your next scheduled briefing so that we can get back to you?
Tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Congressman Chris Cox of California, we thank you very much for your input.
Linda, while you're talking to Congressman Cox, I'm reading tomorrow morning's Washington Post about the victim phone calls aboard the plane. We know, of course, that Barbara Olson, the woman who has appeared many times on this network, who was killed on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon, called her husband, Ted Olson, the man who argued the case for George W. Bush before the United States Supreme Court during the disputed election. What we're now learning is that Barbara Olson and others on board that plane were herded to the back of the plane and ordered to call relatives to say they were about to die. It wasn't sneaking a phone call in. The hijackers with box cutters and knives ordered those who had phones to call their relatives and tell them they were about to die. Also, the Washington Post is reporting that plane, Flight 77 from Dulles to Los Angeles, a Boeing 757, was aimed at the White House. But the target suddenly changed and the plane plowed into the Pentagon. Nobody knows exactly why the target changed from the White House to the Pentagon.
And clearly we will be getting more disturbing information in here in the coming hours. We turn now to correspondent Rick Leventhal. He was on the scene as the towers of the World Trade Center began to collapse today. He was there during the massive triage effort. He joins us live once again. Rick.
Linda, John, give me an idea of what's happening here now. It looks like a construction site. More than a dozen bulldozers just rolled by us here, many of them with the New York City Department of Sanitation. You see them heading up the road now, sort of in a direction away from the scene of the World Trade Center demolition, but they may well be coming back at some point. Not sure where they're going, possibly a staging area, but certainly there is a lot of heavy equipment here on Church Street and in the area at this point, bulldozers and dump trucks and the like, basically waiting for an opportunity to go in there and start clearing the rubble of what's left of those twin towers that collapsed, and of course also World Trade number 7, the 47-story building that came down late this afternoon. The only lights that you see on, by the way, here on Church Street are being powered by generators or batteries. They have turned off electricity and gas in this entire area in the hopes of preventing more fires because of the danger when you have explosions like this of more fires erupting. So no electric in the area. People who live here are just out of luck. And in the meantime, the smoke is still billowing, although you can't really see it at night, still smoldering from the site there where the towers collapsed, where the other building collapsed, and also a nearby hotel which has been burning. We've been talking to firefighters and police officers as they come back from the scene. They're still out there. Many of these guys have been working since early this morning, plan to work through the night and into tomorrow. They're reporting seeing terrible things behind me, just a few blocks south of us here on Church Street. Bodies in the area, certainly lots of bodies, and trucks that have been demolished, fire trucks burned in the fire, a lot of police and emergency vehicles there as well, a lot of rubble, and chunks of the World Trade Center literally in the road blocking Church Street right in front of where the World Trade Center used to stand. We've seen a lot of emergency vehicles going back and forth, as I mentioned, a lot of construction equipment as well. Other than that, it's been relatively quiet out here, basically waiting for light, waiting for the smoke to clear so that they can get in there and begin the grisly task of going through the rubble and recovering the bodies and looking also for those survivors who may still be buried underneath the rubble. That is the one good story that we've been hearing out here. is that there may in fact be some people still alive buried underneath the rubble who've managed to call relatives on their cell phones. The question is, can rescue workers get to them in time? The police commissioner and others have said that they're efforting to rescue people who are trapped, possibly some police officers, possibly others trapped in the rubble. But again, a difficult situation over there because there is so much big debris, and there's also still heat, smoldering, embers, fire, that sort of thing. So they're trying to get the hot coals and get the heat down and move some of that unsteady large debris out of the way if they can, to get to the people who are still possibly alive underneath it all. So obviously a lot going on out here, most of it happening a few blocks away from us in this area, a staging area for vehicles, construction vehicles, ambulances and the like. Guys?
Rick Leventhal, down there as the next phase of this begins, which is a look for survivors, if there are any, buried in the rubble of the Twin Towers, 210-story buildings that collapsed. There is a huge amount of business, or was a huge amount of business done in those two buildings. Let's go now to Fox News senior business correspondent Karen Gibbs. Karen, what does this do to the nation's ability to do business with those two buildings gone? What are we missing as of tomorrow morning?
You're missing the New York Stock Exchange, the American Stock Exchange, and the NASDAQ. They will not be open tomorrow, or today, I'm sorry. And in fact, this is going to be the first time since 1945 when these markets have been closed 2 days back to back. This is the hub of the financial industry and in financial district. Not only are you talking telephones and wires and the antennas on there, but take, for example, Bank of America. The debit cards aren't working because the debit main headquarters right in the World Trade Center, which is no more. Now, it's not affecting credit cards, but it is certainly affecting markets all over the world. Tokyo off 7% at the open. It has come back a little bit, only down 5%, but still it's below the 10,000 level, the first time we've seen that in 17 years. Hong Kong is also down 7%. And going back to Tokyo, you know, Sony, the one and only, it's one of its main stocks on the stock exchange. 30% of its business comes from the United States. That stock is getting slammed. It's off 5%. Australia is at its lowest level in 16 months, down 4%. And you know News Corp, the owner of this station here, 70% of its business comes from the United States. That stock is lower by about 9%. The Japanese banks and airline shares are suffering here. The dollar is trying to bounce, but it's not doing much. But oil up over $1.55 to now better than $31 per barrel. People are very worried that this is now going to affect supplies that are coming out of the Middle East, although OPEC, of course, says it is committed to sufficient supplies.
Karen, can I interrupt you on that point?
You certainly can.
We're getting reports of price gouging in oil already in Mississippi and Kansas
Missouri,
City.
Kansas,
in gasoline.
everything.
How does that make sense?
It doesn't, but you know, people get nervous in times of tragedy like this, and so they start stockpiling. And yes, I'm already seeing $4 and $5 per gallon gasoline in Kansas, of all places. It's affecting these, and of course, the oil companies are trying to come out and say something about that, but certainly, you know, when you have this type of tragedy, people overreact.
Seconds.
Karen, so what about the Mercantile Exchange? Is that in that building, and what is the Mercantile Exchange?
The New York Mercantile Exchange is right across the street, the World Financial Center, but of course it is affected by this, and in fact that's where crude oil, that's probably one of the best known, crude oil and heating oil, are traded, and so they're going to be closed at least through Thursday, so we won't have any chance to even try and hedge those purchases or offset any type of exposure that producers and end users may have. This is going to be significant for the energy market. Also, you trade precious metals there, and you know gold is traditionally a safe haven in this type of drama, and certainly it has reflected that today. It has popped $18 to $290 an ounce. That's almost an unprecedented move recently in these times for gold. So you are seeing some knee-jerk reactions. I do have to say the trade is rather thin because everybody's watching and waiting to see what we're going to do here. But certainly there have been some reactions all across the world.
Karen Gibbs telling us how this is going to affect the markets and the economy and the business community. Of course, one of the big effects will be just so many people in so many major companies were killed. There are companies that lost everybody, and there is simply no way to know what the total toll is right now. No way to know what the effect of all that is. There are companies that we've been running a crawl across the screen on the bottom whose headquarters were at the World Trade Center. They're gone. They're completely gone. There is nobody there to run the company, to answer questions, to take care of accounts, and it's going to be days and days until we have any idea of that effect on all of us, when, of course, the immediate effect is on those people and their families. Still, no idea how many people died in those towers today.
They would look. Some of the latest information coming from the mayor of New York City. Apparently, there are more than 300 firefighters who are unaccounted for and feared dead. More than 32 police officers missing. They're looking for them as well. We will continue to update the information coming in just a moment. This is the Fox News Channel's continuing live special coverage of a terrorist attack that has literally stunned this country. Just getting word now from the mayor of New York City. They have confirmed that there are people alive in the basement of the World Trade Center. They have gotten word that at least 2 people have placed cell phone calls to relatives in Seattle, of all places, letting them know they are alive. Also letting them know there are others with them trapped in the basement of the World Trade Center. The mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, saying that there has been a rescue effort underway there for some time to reach them. They haven't reached them yet. This is one very difficult aspect of this because they don't know what is still standing, what is still supportable in the World Trade Center. These are 2 towers that were 110 stories tall. Now the only thing that is left of them is about 5 stories, and they don't know what is still secure. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has dispatched a number of urban search and rescue teams to try to fortify these buildings and extract the victims. This will take many hours, and as we have been explaining throughout the night, time is of the essence. With me now, my colleague, John Gibson.
Yeah, and joining us in the studio here is Monsignor Jim Lasante of the Catholic Church. And, you know, Father, I think we all want to know how people in your profession, if you will, deal with 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 dead, families out there. There's that many families out there wondering what has happened, no accounting, no way of knowing what's going on. There's this rubble that's about 3 or 4 feet or 20 feet deep that contains these people, some maybe a few alive, but a huge, huge number of dead. And this goes beyond what we've seen in any terrorist act anytime.
I think, John, that every parish, every synagogue, every outreach grouper in the metropolitan area has to be sensitive for their people's sake to, first of all, those who have lost family members and try to be supportive. So bereavement groups are going to be necessary. But even beyond that, to our school children, I can see many of our children wondering about what kind of evil force could bring something like this about. I went tonight to St. Patrick's Cathedral. Cardinal Egan had a mass there for all of those who have died. And he was very eloquent, and he said, let's look at the positive miracles out of this, too. And he talked about being around the lower part of Manhattan today, visiting the hospitals and seeing people of incredible generosity, both the firemen and the policemen, but also people who had no particular business being there except that they wanted to help. And he talked about the great spirit of New York. He said, there's a great evil in the world, but there's greater good, and we have to celebrate the good.
Okay, Father, I wouldn't want to quibble with you about that. However, what's going to happen here in the next few days if these numbers turn out to be true is there's going to be a list published, and there's going to be a little picture by everyone. And it's going to take pages and pages and pages and pages of the New York Times, and millions of people are going to be angry like they've never been angry before. How do religious leaders control that kind of anger?
Oddly enough, I think that religious leaders have to approach it in some ways not unlike the president did in talking about fair retribution. You know, we're a country of laws, and our laws have to be upheld. And an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is only something you come to after there's a sense of justice having been served. So first of all, we have to find out who's responsible before we hold them accountable. I want to say something else, though, John, that I think is important to say. These people who hate us enough to do these heinous crimes didn't develop their hatred this morning. This is coming after years and years of what they perceive to be our particular oppression of them and their people. I guess I wonder if we hit too hard, and especially hit the wrong people, if we're not creating a new generation of children and grandchildren of these new martyrs, and that's how they'll be portrayed, who will then come back and kill our grandchildren. In other words, when does the cycle of violence stop? When do we stop, keep hitting them, and they hit us? When do we finally say the insanity has to stop worldwide?
Well, yes, but the argument is we haven't hit. Well, I'll tell you what, Monsignor, hang with us just a second. We'll discuss this on the other side of a quick pause. Let me just remind everybody what we're talking about here. An untold number of dead. New York City Twin Towers collapsed, 4 planes hijacked, 4 crashed, 3 into their targets. We're going to take a quick pause to let our Fox News stations join us after just a moment. We are back. This is the Fox News Channel's continuing coverage of the terrorist attacks today in New York and Washington, D.C. 4 airliners hijacked, 3 hit targets in New York and Washington, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, as well as the Pentagon. Untold number of people have been killed. We have no idea how many. We know there's something upwards of 50,000 in the World Trade Center towers. This is a picture of the second plane hitting the second tower this morning, right about 9 o'clock. That plane was loaded with passengers, hijacked, and flown directly into those towers. And the incredible devastation that has followed. Monsignor Jim Lisante of the Catholic Church is with us right now. Linda? We also have some more information to bring in, perhaps a very bitter coincidence. It so happens that September 11th was declared an International Day of Peace by the United Nations. Today that we're obviously seeing that the declaration of that date is so very, very sad. Also getting information about some of the victims who were aboard those planes. There were 4 of them hijacked and crashed. 2 American Airlines, 2 United Airlines. They're beginning to release more and more of the passenger manifest. What is perhaps most important right now is that intelligence sources are telling us they believe that on one of those hijacked flights, there was a person who was connected with Osama bin Laden, and that person may have some connection in Broward County, Florida, or Daytona Beach, Florida, and that the FBI may be preparing to launch some sort of search in those areas. We're also getting word of other people who were on board those flights. We have mentioned before that Barbara Olson, a colleague here at Fox News, a frequent political commentator, was on board the plane that took off from Dulles Airport and ended up crashing into the Pentagon. Word now coming in that the passengers were herded in the back of the plane and told to call their loved ones and let them know that that plane was going down and that they were going to die. Also, more information coming in about others who were on board. The American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. Among others, we now know that the executive producer of the NBC TV show Frasier was on board that plane, along with his wife. Also, the co-founder of a very well-known technology company called Akamai, also on board American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston. More and more names coming in, but we are getting more and more information from those manifests. They are not complete yet. American Airlines, United Airlines, trying to reach all the relatives of those on board those planes, and until they do so, they will not give us a complete list of the manifests. John? Before we go back to Monsignor Lisante, let's go to our Derry Alexander, who is at St. Vincent's, where they've been handling the wounded and the burned and the maimed and all of those injured today. Derry has some new information about what is going on there now. Derry?
Yeah, actually, John, over my shoulder, you can see they're actually bringing out a police officer, New York City police officer. There you see him on a gurney. I'm understanding that they are actually going to start digging again down at the World Trade Center. So they're expecting in the next couple of hours for things to get very, very busy here at St. Vincent's. Apparently, there's been a bit of a lull. You see another officer on a gurney. This officer actually laying down, and he does not look to be conscious. There are several emergency emergency workers around him, and I guess they're going to be lifting him off very, very carefully here. This is actually a bit more than we've seen in the last few moments. They just picked him up. He appears not to be moving at all. Like I said, this is a bit more action that we've seen in the last half an hour. We understand when they begin digging, and we saw lots of heavy construction equipment heading south towards the World Trade Center. Apparently, they're expecting to have a lot more, many more people arriving at the hospital. Altogether today, they've seen 362 people. They've had 4 deaths. One, a firefighter, apparently had a heart attack, just overcome by all of the destruction. 50 major injuries. You know, the interesting thing that Mayor Giuliani was saying earlier was that he was saying the city doesn't need any more volunteers. Apparently at this hospital, they had 500 doctors show up, 150 nurses show up, all volunteers from all over the city, all 5 boroughs, Long Island, upstate New York, New Jersey. They said they've been overwhelmed with volunteers. But the other thing is, interestingly enough, we've been saying all over the place and actually all over the country, we've been talking about how they need blood. Well, apparently right here at St. Vincent's, they've turned away people. They're saying that they do not need blood. They're in very, very good supply. And one of their major strategies here, they seem to be very, very together. One reason, because they were a main artery for victims during the 1993 bombing at the World Trade Center. So they've been through this before. Most of the injuries then were smoke inhalation, but they've been through this before. They get the people who are have minor injuries, smoke inhalation, those types of injuries. They get them in and out of the emergency room right away, and they send them to other places to check on them, other makeshift emergency rooms throughout the city, so that they can have lots of room in the emergency room for the major injuries. So they say right now they've got about 5 people in the emergency room. They are on standby for all of the officers, all of the firefighters, and all of the other people that we've been talking about all evening who are supposedly alive underneath that debris, and that is exactly what they are waiting to see come up here. Now, I just want to introduce the person who runs the emergency room. It's Dr. Richard Westfall. He has been on top of this the entire time. And Doctor, tell me, what is going on right now? We just saw a couple of officers come in, and what is the status really right now?
Right. As you know, we've had at St. Vincent's about 360 patients since about 9 o'clock this morning, of which about 50 of them are not really severe traumas, and we've had 4 deaths, and we've admitted many, many patients. And as you mentioned, we have triage patients out of the emergency department up to other areas. We've taken over a rehabilitation gym. We've taken over a Rice psychiatry gym, and we've taken over a dialysis unit and made them into makeshift small emergency departments so that we're available. And right now we do have about 5 patients in the main emergency department. So we're available for major traumas, for rescuers that are coming in, and for, I would agree with the mayor, we're all hopeful that some victims will still be rescued and we'll be able to help them to survive. I think that's a hope that we all have.
Now, I was just saying before that you've been through this before because of 1993, so you really know how to handle. Yeah, obviously, this is much greater magnitude, but I mean.
Yeah, I think that's probably the only fortunate thing from 1993, because there we saw about 200 patients, but about 185 of them were smoke inhalations, meaning people that had some difficulty breathing and had smoke on their face, etc. But we're not really that injured or that hurt. I just reviewed an article we participated in from then, and only 10 victims throughout all New York City. Only 10 patients died during that disaster, and certainly the numbers obviously are more dramatic than that now.
Now, we are really surprised to hear, because I heard the governor of Pennsylvania talking about go out and give blood. All over the country they've been talking about giving blood, and you just told me that you all don't need that.
Well, you know what happened was, all since this morning, right on the corner behind me on 11th Street, 7th Avenue, we had a makeshift card table with tables, and we actually took volunteers that went up to the blood bank and donated blood. But as of about 5 or 6 o'clock, they closed that down by asking volunteers. We didn't need it any further.
Okay. You know what? I just want to divert us over again. We see more patients seeming to come over. I can't identify whether or not it's an officer or a civilian, but we see once again activity picking up from people coming in off of gurneys. from downtown, and it seems like maybe they've started the digging, and maybe hopefully they are bringing those people up, because as we have heard reports throughout the night that there were a lot of people who were crying screams, trying to indicate that they were definitely alive under all of the debris, which is absolutely amazing considering all of these hours. But once again, I guess I can say that maybe the only wonderful news out of this, as the president was saying today, we may have had buildings damaged, but the American spirit is certainly not damaged, and they are definitely very well prepared right here at St. Vincent's Hospital. Because of the last tragedy in 1993, because of all of the volunteers that have come out. I mean, I was over at Chelsea Piers just about an hour and a half ago, and there were streams of people, civilians just coming, just arriving, walking in, volunteering. People just off the street in regular clothes, willing to help out however they could, because they just wanted to be a part of this. Everybody feels, their hearts just go out to all of the victims, whether or not you knew people or not. There's no way not to feel what is going on here. So once again, they are very much prepared.
Deri Alexander, we thank you very much for your live reporting as we continue to sort of track the triage effort in New York City. Also, some interesting information just coming in. This on the massive investigation. The Justice Department, obviously, at the lead of it, the FBI working very hard right now. We have gotten word from senior correspondent Rita Cosby that apparently her intelligence sources are telling her that the intelligence intercepts that they have gotten that may link this to Osama bin Laden or his backers. Apparently, these were cell phone calls. Rita reporting that in one case, they intercepted a call where a bin Laden backer was acknowledging that some of the targets had been hit. Another intercept apparently was from someone who appears to have been a bin Laden backer on a plane, who may have been talking to someone else either on another part of the plane or elsewhere. Just a little bit more information. Cell phone intercepts have been helpful in previous incidents in terms of tracing who is behind terrorist attacks. We would just remind you that in August of 1998, U.S. intelligence was able to pin down Osama bin Laden's ties to the East Africa bombings, those two embassies, U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, because they were able to intercept cell phone calls. Once again, it appears that cell phone calls may give us a significant break in this investigation in these first hours after the terrorist attacks.
Linda, we're still we still have with us Monsignor Jim Lisante of the Catholic Church. Monsignor, you heard Deri Alexander talking about all the volunteers over at St. Vincent's helping the wounded. Does the faith community have a similar outpouring of volunteers to help what is going to be a huge number of bereaved?
Yeah, I think that folks will step forward. Religion can be a great help in that people are encouraged by their particular religion to be generous. I have to tell you, though, that what you're seeing, if it is bin Laden, is a real bastardization of religion, which happens too often in our world, where people use their particular religious point of view to justify their killing. Certainly the statements you've had on Fox earlier tonight from him indicate that he believes that his religion gives him the right. No one who is a theologian who reads the Quran or is a Muslim believes that that idiot knows what he's talking about. But he believes he has the right to kill because of his religion. It's very sad. I need to ask you guys questions. Do you worry about saying on the air that the FBI is moving in on Dade County and maybe giving a leg up on these poor people who can be co-conspirators and hide information?
We would worry, but we assume that they are a step ahead of us.
Okay.
Monsignor, if I could just ask you to hang on for just a moment. I mentioned a moment ago this information that senior correspondent Rita Cosby is just getting from her intelligence sources. We've tracked her down. She's on the phone with us now to explain a little bit more. Rita, what do you know about these cell phone calls that may be linked to Osama bin Laden backers?
Well, and Linda, I want to also tell our viewers I'm on a train right now coming from Stamford, Connecticut to Washington, and in fact, some people who were wounded actually in the attack are on the plane with me here, including some Red Cross workers. A lot of them got on at Penn Station, and some of them got off in Newark, some of them got off in Trenton, but some of them are still on the plane, train with me here, and some of them covered with ash. These are sort of the so-called walking wounded, the ones who are not seriously injured, but some of them said that they were going home. Some of them were going to go to other hospitals outside of New York, so it's a pretty ominous sight here, even on this train that I'm on. But I've been talking to some law enforcement officials, and they were telling me that, my intelligence sources are telling me that they were able to intercept at least 2 cell phone calls from bin Laden supporters. And they were able to intercept one from a supporter that appears to have been on the ground, acknowledging that 2 of the 3 or 2 of the 4 targets were hit. We know that there were at least 4, but the intercept may have said 2 of the 3 targets have been hit. In the other case, there was another phone call that was intercepted from appears to be someone who was on the plane, a bin Laden backer, talking about some logistics of the hijacking. So these are 2 intercepts that were intercepted by U.S. intelligence officials, actually overhearing bits of conversations from bin Laden backers. And this is part of the reason that they strongly believe that he is behind this attack. It's also important to note that this has been a resource that intelligence officials have used before, that in August of 1998, U.S. intelligence officials were also able to intercept mobile phone conversations from 2 bin Laden backers at that point who were discussing the East Africa bombings. Those are the bombings of the U.S. embassies in East Africa, and that's how they were able to pin those 2 blasts to bin Laden. So this is a practice that they have used before successfully. And this is indeed what we're hearing, in addition to some other information that are pointing signs towards bin Laden. In addition to this, they keep telling me that they strongly believe that they've done a lot of research since these attacks were carried out, and that they still strongly believe that he is the only one with the sort of sophistication, the finances, and the widespread infrastructure to be able to carry that out. But now they're getting some hard and fast evidence that seems to be tying him to it.
Rita, it may seem to a lot of people that it would be impossible to have records of or some recording of a cell phone call. I mean, most people think that cell phone calls, when you make them, your voice goes out into the ether. But apparently there is some system that does track cell phone calls. What do you know?
Yeah, there very much is, and I can tell you particularly at sensitive locations. Often I'm told, it's funny because I have a lot of individuals that I speak to in the intelligence arena, and I'm told, look, do not make a cell phone call, particularly around the Pentagon, around the White House, because there are intercepts there constantly with individuals who can constantly overhear cell phones. You put out a signal when you make a call, and that signal can be easily intercepted if you can determine what frequency those calls are made on. And particularly when something like this happens on U.S. soil, they dial into all these frequencies, try to pick up any sort of intercept. And often, even though these individuals seem to be fairly sophisticated, they were obviously not sophisticated enough for them not to be intercepted on cell phone calls. In addition to that, what we were talking about, I was reporting earlier from 2 FAA officials who were telling me that it appears that they shut off the transponders on these planes. So these were fairly sophisticated individuals who were behind the attack. And one of the big concerns is that they may have actually pulled the breakers which go to the so-called black boxes. And that could be very difficult in terms of an investigative tool, because if they pulled the breakers, which if they were able to pull the transponders, which it appears was the case, in other words, so they were not being able to be picked up on radar, then they may have been sophisticated enough to pull the breakers that go to the so-called black boxes. That's the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, and that means that the power would have been shut off for those boxes. So even if the investigators are lucky enough to find the black boxes in these 4 separate attacks, there may not be anything on them, because it's highly unusual they would have shut off the transponder. If they did that, there's a good chance that they may have also shut off the breakers, therefore no information going to the black boxes. So they appear to be very sophisticated, but not sophisticated enough not to make some cell phone calls that seem to be easily intercepted.
All right, senior correspondent Rita Cosby. Rita, thank you for bringing us that late-breaking information.
Let's go now to Carl Cameron in Washington, where, of course, one of the hijacked planes slammed into the Pentagon today. Still trying to figure out how many people may have been killed there and injured and so forth. And Carl, following the investigation into what is going on or where we stand in determining who is responsible for all this. Carl, at this late hour, what's new?
Well, a number of things, and much of it sort of dovetails with what Rita Cosby was reporting. First of all, congressional leaders have been briefed by U.S. intelligence and Defense Department officials, classified briefings, so much of what was said behind closed doors stays behind there, but there is always a little bit of leaking in Washington. And we can tell you that the Bush administration and intelligence and defense officials have told lawmakers that they believe that the pilots, or at least on each plane there was a hijacker who was a pilot, or at least a highly trained individual capable of flying this. They point to a number of different things. First of all, as Rita pointed out, the transponders were turned off, which meant basically that it couldn't be tracked not by radar but by audio, and it couldn't ping back to flight control and air traffic control. In addition to that, it is believed that the Attorney General John Ashcroft told lawmakers behind closed doors that the vectors with which these planes crashed into the World Trade Towers as well as in the Pentagon were so sophisticated that it simply couldn't have been dumb luck. It had to have been accomplished by some people with extensive training, and they believe, in fact, that it's possible that each of these planes were piloted in the crash stage by terrorists who may have actually attended U.S. flight school. Apparently it's $50,000 for the appropriate level of classes to fly a 757. If not something of that nature, the United States government is now conducting a worldwide inventory to find out what countries might have highly sophisticated simulation machines, the type of machinery in which one sits inside and literally is trained how to fly them. There is considerable reason to suspect that the use of the cell phones on the planes was not for lack of sophistication, but was in fact by design, essentially leaving a trail of crumbs for U.S. government officials to find out, because ultimately terrorists' success depends upon their being understood and their being found out. And if this is religious martyrdom, as many Islamic fundamentalists choose to achieve for their goals, they want it to be known that they're doing this. A variety of other... I'm sorry, John?
No, go right ahead, Carl. I was not interrupting.
Oh, I'm sorry. The other thing that we are now told was said behind closed doors by the Bush administration is that there is likely to be a whole series of very significant economic impacts to all of this. Airline industry officials across the board have told Congress that they're, notwithstanding the loss of life and the terrible tragedy today, but they are expecting a 50% fall off in airline ticket sales in the next few months. And the airline industry has told Congress that they don't think they're going to have the cash flow to make it through the end of the month based upon the projected ticket fall off that this whole process will, they believe, lead to. On the subject of money, Congress tomorrow, even though they will publicly be taking up a resolution of condemnation, will crack open the budget and will start looking into an immediate supplemental budget, which would be increased spending for such things as airport safety, counterintelligence, a whole slew, billions and billions of dollars that just yesterday were not planned to be spent because of what seems trivial in retrospect, the argument that they had over what is a Social Security lockbox and what is a Social Security surplus. Democrats and Republicans alike now no longer constrained by that rhetoric, planning as we speak to start throwing money at national security issues. Finally, a couple of things that are perhaps unrelated, but intelligence and diplomatic officials looking at. The chief of staff for Saudi Arabia was scheduled to come to the United States for an entire month to take part in the planning of coordinated military operations. And just yesterday, quite a